Urgent! Zelensky is heading to negotiations with Putin. This is the real reason why Keith Kellogg came. Vance leaked something unexpected, a new date for the end of the war. And the friendship is over. Hungary hysterically appealed to Zelensky. You need to hear this. All the details coming up.
The Kremlin continues to skillfully distract attention. Lavrov stated that Moscow rejects the U.S. conditions for establishing peace in Ukraine, but at the same time blames Zelensky himself for everything. Supposedly, he is refusing all proposals.
Trump raised all these issues at a meeting in Washington where Zelensky and his European sponsors were present. He made it clear that there are several principles that, according to Washington, must be accepted, including renouncing NATO membership and discussing territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to all of this. He even refused to repeal the law banning the Russian language. How can we meet with a man who only pretends to be a leader?
Of course, Lavrov couldn't help but mention the meeting with Putin, even though Zelensky has repeatedly stated his readiness. But it was actually the Kremlin that spoke of some serious and lengthy preparations with no set deadlines. But now they are once again blaming the president of Ukraine.
He says his immediate priority is a meeting with Putin. But this is simply a game. A game he knows how to play exceptionally well because he consistently desires and actively seeks out drama in absolutely everything he undertakes. He genuinely does not care about the actual substance or true essence of anything.
But they have to blame someone, right? Just not themselves.
In actual fact, after the significant events in Washington, following that particular and rather impactful incident that specifically happened, the Russian Federation's presence basically disappeared completely from the entire information space for a period of 3 full days. They can't afford to offend Trump, so accordingly, they have to shift the responsibility onto someone else. Because, of course, Putin was not going to meet with Zelensky, is not going to and does not plan to.
As stated by the European Commissioner for Security and Space, Andrius Kubilius, Moscow is simply afraid that Ukraine will actually receive real security guarantees, because that would complicate the planning of new aggression.
An absolutely and unequivocally correct statement of fact, which is strongly supported by compelling and irrefutable evidence. Russia does not genuinely desire any truly effective security guarantees for Ukraine, because it is firmly set, let's say, on the complete and utter destruction not just of the Ukrainian state, since it demonstrably cannot achieve this devastating goal by purely military means. It is, as before, intent on destroying Ukrainian statehood.
Meanwhile, Vance suggested a possible end date for the war. He said it could end within the next 6 months. He also expressed optimism regarding Trump's policies.
We are trying to negotiate with both the Russians and the Ukrainians to find a compromise and stop the killings. I think the president has tried to conduct very active, very energetic diplomacy here.
The 6 months that Vance specifically mentioned, of course, they are absolutely not based on any precise calculations by American think tanks or any other similar organizations. It's simply a rather figurative, let's say, a conceptual and virtual positioning. One absolutely shouldn't expect that such an incredibly complex, deeply entrenched, and profoundly significant conflict between the nations of Russia and Ukraine can be resolved in merely 2 days or even 2 short weeks.
And Andriy Sybiha responded to the accusations from Hungary's foreign ministry regarding threats to their state from President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I'll answer in the Hungarian style. There's no need to tell the president of Ukraine what to do or say, or when to do it. He is the president of Ukraine, not of Hungary. Hungary's energy security is in your own hands. Diversify and become independent from Russia, just like the rest of Europe.
On August 25th, Germany's Minister of Finance Lars Klingbeil arrived in Ukraine on an unexpected visit and upon arrival stated that Ukraine can continue to rely on Germany's unwavering support.
Perhaps not publicly, but the government of Germany will now be considering specific industrial and technological clusters much more concretely. Let's put it this way, focusing on extensive joint military-industrial cooperation with Ukraine, which is a very important and strategic partnership. In fact, in some significant ways, this particular situation is even much more profoundly interesting because it represents a much more concrete and tangible signal than, for example, the recent visit of Merz.
Meanwhile, the German foreign minister stated that concessions from Ukraine are only possible when it receives real security guarantees. essentially guarantees equivalent to NATO membership. Without this, demanding the return of territories is simply impossible. Well, at least it's good that someone in Europe understands this.
Exclusive. The Ukrainian armed forces have decisively destroyed a column of Russian troops. There are heaps of casualties. There hasn't been such a rout before. A loud failure for Putin. The Kremlin gathered a horde near Pokrovsk, but the offensive turned into a fiasco. Up next in the report, all the latest footage from the front lines. What's happening at the front? Watch.
Russia has gathered a horde near Pokrovsk, enough to capture an average European country, but they achieved no result. Putin's plans for Ukraine's Independence Day are falling apart. The Ukrainian armed forces launched an attack in the Sumy region and pushed the occupiers out of yet another settlement, as well as the massive destruction of a Russian column in the Donetsk region. We've gathered the most important frontline news from the past 24 hours for you. The occupiers decided to unleash hell on earth for our defenders holding the approaches to Pokrovsk, according to the Dnipro Operational Strategic Group of Forces. There, the Russians have concentrated a number of troops twice the pre-war population of Pokrovsk itself, which allows the Russian army to storm Ukrainian positions almost around the clock.
First, the ambitious goal is to control the outskirts of Pokrovsk in order to gain control over Pokrovsk itself. The second is to exert pressure toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. And of course, in the Lyman area. In the Lyman direction, the main pressure is toward the Serebryansky forestry. Somewhere there, they have the ambition to reach the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. Well, let's just say no one can forbid them from dreaming.
Likewise, the Russian plan to present a bunker dweller with a gift for Ukraine's Independence Day in this region ended in failure. According to the military, the recent intensification of assaults toward Kupiansk was specifically tied to this date. But even here, aside from the increased number of occupier casualties, it didn't really lead to anything.
The Russian occupiers gave their troops a clear order to capture the city of Kupiansk by Independence Day. This had two meanings. The first meaning is political, since Kupiansk is one of the symbols of the strength of the Ukrainian army, because it was deoccupied in 2022, and now it was important for the enemy to take it back politically before Independence Day. And of course, it's also a logistical hub. Today, Kupiansk remains under the blue and yellow flag. In other words, one way or another, we managed to hold out, and the enemy was unable to carry out their intentions on our land.
Another hotspot on the battle map remains Chasiv Yar. The enemy managed to seize part of the settlement, but was stopped in the middle of the residential area. As a result, the objectives for which the city was stormed for over a year have still not been achieved.
Since their control over Chasiv Yar is incomplete, even though Putin himself pointed this out during his meeting with Lukashenko, they are currently unable to make use of it. The same story applies to their incomplete control over the city of Toretsk, where they have, without a doubt, taken a significant part of it. But since they cannot get through the city itself and move further, once again, for now, this brings them no real benefit. That's why now they're dreaming of advancing on Kostiantynivka from the Pokrovsk direction.
Meanwhile, in the Donetsk region, the Ukrainian armed forces are not only managing to repel attacks, but also delivering quite impressive strikes. For example, the fighters of the Phoenix unit reported that the day before, they destroyed a Russian column, and at the same time, at least half a dozen Russian soldiers. The footage shows several assault troops on motorcycles trying to break through closer to Ukrainian positions. One after another, at least half a dozen occupiers were methodically sent to Kobzon's concert. At the same time, they managed to destroy 4 motorcycles and a self-propelled Emsta-S howitzer. Meanwhile, in the Sumy region, the Ukrainian armed forces have come out of a deep defense and are moving forward. Deep state analysts report that the defense forces have driven the occupiers out of yet another settlement. This refers to the village of Andriivka in the Sumy region. The corresponding changes can already be seen on the online battle map.
Shock! Russia is paralyzed. Trains are not running. In Russia, more than 70 trains were delayed after a drone attack. And this is just the beginning. The Ukrainian armed forces regularly strike at enemy logistics. The Kremlin is losing everything. Real chaos has begun in Russia. What colossal damage is this causing the enemy? Watch.
There is a massive collapse in Russia after the overnight drone attack.
There are 2 of them flying somewhere. One is flying right here. That way in the same direction. They're all heading in the same direction.
Planes aren't flying and trains are stuck in the middle of the tracks.
But right now, we need to hold on a little longer. These aren't just empty words, this is a matter of life.
In the Voronezh region, a drone crash damaged the overhead power lines, causing serious disruptions to train traffic. Officially, Russian railways announced that 71 long-distance trains are delayed. The maximum delay reaches 5.5 hours.
So here we are, moving along slowly. Then sometimes we stop and just stand there for a while.
A railway station in the Volgograd region, which is used in the occupiers' military logistics, was also hit.
Strikes are being carried out not only on the stations themselves, like the attack on the Lysky station in the Voronezh region, but also, accordingly, on the railway tracks themselves, including sabotage. But first and foremost, active operations are being carried out, namely sabotage actions at logistical facilities. These include bridges and, accordingly, transfer stations along the route. And this makes it possible to completely undermine the logistics of the occupying army. Thanks to these successful actions, the Russian side was forced to admit that the redeployment of operational units from the operational reserve of the Russian armed forces to the immediate combat zone has been blocked.
This is the 18th consecutive attack on the railway infrastructure in the south, which has disrupted the supply of ammunition and personnel to the occupying army. After all, the railway network is the most important logistical artery for Putin's troops.
Strikes are also being carried out on rolling stock, which reduces logistical capabilities. The latest successful example is the strikes on the railway convoy transporting fuel and lubricants in the Zaporizhzhia region near the occupied town of Tokmak. The occupiers were forced to admit the high effectiveness of this type of strike at the moment, both in terms of blocking railway traffic and accordingly destroying rolling stock.
By the way, drones have repeatedly attacked vital railway stations in the Rostov and Volgograd regions, causing significant hours-long delays for numerous trains heading to southern Russia and back.
Our train is being delayed. We've been standing in Belaya Kalitva for 3 hours already. The newsfeed says train delays are up to 7 hours. There is a threat of a UAV attack. And no other news. We're just waiting for now.
It's 1750. It's 31 degrees Celsius in the carriage, and the delay has already reached 10 hours.
In July, more than 130 passenger trains were delayed due to damage to the overhead lines. Both long-distance and suburban trains were affected, including those heading to the annexed Crimea.
Then in another place. They didn't manage to deliver the food here or there in time. But on social media, the carrier wrote that everyone was provided with everything they needed. But in reality, it was only when we reached Voronezh, around 3-something in the morning, that someone came to us and gave us a bottle of water each, some crackers that were about to expire, and instant noodles.
As a result of the disruption of Russian railways operations, there are currently shortages of fuel and lubricants in the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which is temporarily occupied by Russian forces. And accordingly, there are problems with fuel and lubricants, and it's impossible to deliver them to the end consumer in the Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions. And this is an indicator of the effectiveness of operations of this kind. That is, Russians are feeling the consequences not only psychologically, but first and foremost in the inability to refuel their personal vehicles.
Russia is gradually being overtaken by railway chaos. And Russians themselves are increasingly feeling the consequences of the war unleashed by the Kremlin against Ukraine.
My dear ones, I truly understand how very hard this is for you.
That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.